The night was darker than any he had seen in months. Clouds pressed low over the desert hills, smothering the moonlight until even the cacti seemed to melt into shadows. The wind carried the dry, metallic scent of blood. He staggered against it, one hand clamped over the wound in his side, the other gripping a broken rifle like a crutch. His breath came shallow and fast. Somewhere behind him, coyotes howled. Ahead, the faint flicker of a campfire promised either salvation or more trouble. He had been riding all day before the ambush. The trail was supposed to be clear. He had checked it himself. But men desperate for gold and revenge have ways of finding you even in the emptiest corners of Arizona territory. He had managed to crawl away after his horse was shot out from under him, dragging himself through the dust until he thought his lungs would burst. Now the world tilted and spun, the wound pulsing like a drum. He cursed under his breath, pressing harder on his side. Warm blood kept slipping between his fingers. He knew he wouldn't last long without help. When he stumbled toward the firelight, he half expected it to be a hallucination. But there it was. A small camp tucked behind a line of rocks, a single tent, and a horse tied nearby. The scent of beans cooking over a low flame drifted through the air. He called out, his voice rough and broken. The flap of the tent shifted. A woman stepped out, wrapped in a worn shawl, her hair tangled from the wind. Her belly, round and heavy, showed clearly beneath her dress. She froze when she saw him, this bloodied stranger swaying at the edge of her light, eyes glassy and skin pale. For a second, neither spoke. The only sound was the pop of the fire and the faint whine of the wind through the stones. He tried to say something, but the words tangled in his throat. His knees gave way, and he fell hard, the rifle clattering beside him. When he opened his eyes again, she was kneeling beside him, her hands trembling as she tore strips from her shawl to press against his wound. "Don't move," she said quietly. Her voice carried both fear and determination. "You're losing blood fast." He wanted to push her hands away, to tell her she didn't know what she was doing, but his strength was gone. He could barely lift his head. "No, don't touch." There he groaned, trying to shift his body away from her hands, but she didn't stop. Her eyes, wide and steady, met his with something fierce behind them. "I have to," she said. "If I don't, you'll die." There was something in her tone, something final, like she had already made peace with the danger. She worked quickly, tearing more fabric, soaking it with the little water she had, pressing it hard against the wound despite his protests. He cried out once, his voice echoing off the rocks, but she didn't flinch. She had seen too much pain already to be frightened by the sound of it as she worked. The firelight danced across their faces, revealing the exhaustion etched into both of them. She wasn't supposed to be out here alone. A woman with child traveling through Apache country in the middle of a dry season was close to suicide. But she had her reasons. Everyone running from something did. Her husband had been gone for months, lost to the war or the mines. No one could say. She was heading east, toward what was left of her family, hoping to find shelter before the baby came. Yet fate had set another soul in her path tonight, bleeding and half dead, forcing her to make a choice she never thought she'd face. He drifted in and out of consciousness as she cleaned and bound the wound. Between the flickers of awareness, memories clawed at him, faces of the men who had come after him, their eyes cold and hungry for gold, their guns glinting in the desert light. He remembered the sound of his horse screaming, the ground slamming into him, the sting of dust in his mouth. And then this, a stranger's hands, gentle but unrelenting, trying to pull him back from the edge. When dawn finally began to seep through the sky, the bleeding had slowed. He lay wrapped in her old blanket, his head resting on her pack. She sat beside him, watching the horizon with weary eyes. The fire had burned low, and the air was cool. Her hand moved absently to her stomach, feeling the faint kick beneath her ribs. "Why did you help me?" he whispered, his voice rasping. She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Because once someone helped me," she said simply. "And because I couldn't just watch a man die." He nodded weakly, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of guilt, something heavy and unspoken. He tried to tell her to leave, to save herself before whoever had done this to him came back. But when he opened his mouth, no words came. The pain was too deep. His body shook from the effort. She moved closer, brushing his hair from his forehead. "Don't try to talk," she murmured. "You need rest." He wanted to believe her, to close his eyes and let the sleep take him. But he knew rest was a dangerous thing out here. The men who had shot him would be following his trail. They would come before long, and when they did, she'd be caught in the crossfire. He forced himself upright, wincing. "You have to leave," he said. "Now, they'll come for me." Her expression hardened. "Then we'll be ready," she said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "We?" he asked weakly. "Yes," she said. "I'm not letting you die here." The courage in her voice startled him. She was scared anyone could see that, but she had buried her fear under layers of stubbornness and faith. He realized then that this woman had been fighting her own kind of war long before he stumbled into her camp. The sun crept higher, painting the rocks with dull gold. Far off, a dust cloud stirred on the horizon riders. She saw it before he did. Her hand tightened on the old pistol by her side. One far too small to stop what was coming. "They found you," she said quietly. He swallowed hard, trying to stand. "It's me they want," he said. "Not you. If you stay, she cut him off with a shake of her head. "If I go, you'll bleed out before they get here." "I'm not running." He wanted to argue, but he couldn't. The pain in his side flared again, stealing his breath. The woman turned away for a moment, her hand pressing against her stomach as another wave of discomfort crossed her face. The baby was restless, as if it too could sense the danger in the air. The riders drew closer, the sound of hooves pounding like thunder through the dry earth. The woman stood, her shawl fluttering in the wind, the firelight catching the determination in her eyes. She loaded the pistol with shaking hands. Glancing once at the wounded man beside her, he could barely lift his rifle, but he tried. Together they waited in silence, two strangers, bound by chance and necessity. Facing the storm that was about to break over them, the desert around them seemed to hold its breath. Just before the first horse crested the ridge, he turned to her. "If they take me, don't try to stop them," he said softly. She met his gaze, her jaw tight. "Don't tell me what to do." He almost smiled at that, though it hurt to move his face. The grit, the stubbornness, it reminded him of the land itself. Unyielding, fierce. The thunder of hooves grew louder. Dust filled the air. She stood tall, despite the fear trembling through her hands. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this moment would decide everything, the fate of the stranger. Her unborn child, maybe even her own life. The first shadow appeared on the ridge. He tried to lift his gun again, but his strength failed. He felt her hand on his chest, firm and protective. "No," she whispered. "Let me handle this." And before he could speak, she stepped forward into the rising dust. Her figure small, but defiant against the growing light. The sound of hooves and shouting filled the air, and the wounded man's vision blurred until all he could see was her silhouette. Standing between him and the oncoming riders, then everything went white. The desert wind howled, carrying with it the taste of smoke and fear. Whether she saved him or doomed them both would only be known when the sun climbed higher. But in that brief, breathless moment, one thing was certain. The pregnant woman did not hesitate to do the unthinkable. To save his life, the sound of gunfire broke the morning stillness. The woman ducked low behind the rocks, clutching the small pistol in both hands. Dust and pebbles rained down as bullets struck the stone above her head. The wounded man tried to rise, but pain drove him back down. He could only watch as she fired a single shot toward the riders. The echo rolled across the desert, swallowed by the empty air. The attackers slowed their horses, cautious now. They were rough-looking men faces burned by the sun, clothes torn and dirty, guns strapped tight against their chests. The leader, a tall man with a scar running across his cheek, raised his hand and called out. His voice carried icily across the wind. "Throw down your gun, lady. We just want the man. He's got something that belongs to us." Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She glanced down at the stranger lying beside the fire. His eyes were open now, sharp despite the pain. He shook his head weakly, mouthing a word she could barely read. "No," She didn't answer the men. Instead, she crawled closer to him, whispering, "What do they want?" His breath rattled in his chest. "A map," he said. "In my pack." Her eyes flicked to the worn leather satchel lying beside his blanket. The bag looked ordinary enough, but from the way his voice trembled, she understood it was worth killing for. She didn't ask questions. "Not yet." The leader shouted again, impatient now. "Last chance, lady? Hand him over, or you'll both die out here." She steadied her breath and called back, "He's hurt. If you want him alive, you'll have to come get him yourself." That made the man hesitate. He didn't like traps, and everything about this place rocks, shadows, the rising heat smelled like one. He signaled his men to spread out. The wounded man tried again to move, but his arm gave way. "You should go," he rasped. "Take the horse. Ride east till you find water." She looked at him and shook her head. "I told you before, I'm not leaving you." The words sounded strange even to her. She had no reason to stay. He was a stranger, dangerous maybe, and his presence had already drawn death to her camp. But something deep inside told her running would be worse. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, not with pity, not with demand, but with the quiet understanding of someone who had already lost too much. She checked the pistol again. Only 2 bullets left. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to stay steady. The riders crept closer, their horses moving slowly through the rocks. The wind picked up, sweeping the fire's smoke into a low haze. For a moment, everything blurred, dust, heat, and fear mixing together. Then a sharp crack split the air as another shot rang out. The woman ducked, firing back blindly. The bullet hit one of the riders' saddles, and the horse reared, throwing its rider. The others shouted and fired in return. The man beside her groaned, his face twisted in pain. "Give me the rifle," he whispered. She hesitated. "You can barely lift your head." He forced his arm up, teeth clenched. "Give it to me." She handed him the weapon, helping him brace it against a rock. His fingers shook, but when he pulled the trigger, the shot was clean. One of the attackers fell, clutching his shoulder. The others scattered for cover. The silence that followed was heavy. The leader cursed, retreating a few steps. Then, slowly, he raised his hand again. "Fine," he shouted. "We'll come back for you when you're weaker. Ain't no water for miles. You'll die out here, both of you." The sound of retreating hooves faded into the distance. The woman didn't move until the desert was quiet again. Then she dropped the pistol and sank to her knees, shaking all over. He lowered the rifle, his breath ragged. "You shouldn't have done that," he said softly. "You'd be dead if I hadn't." She replied. She turned away for a moment, brushing the sweat from her forehead. The sun had risen higher now, casting long, sharp shadows. The smell of smoke still clung to the air. She stared at the horizon where the men had disappeared. Knowing they would return, he closed his eyes, fighting another wave of pain. "They won't stop," he murmured. "Not until they get that map. And tell me what's on it," she said. "Tell me why they're hunting you." For a while, he said nothing. The only sound was the crackle of the dying fire and the faint rustle of wind through the rocks. Finally, he spoke. "It's a mining map," he said. "Old one. Shows where the silver veins run through the southern hills. My brother found it months ago, before they killed him. I was trying to get it to the fort. Thought maybe it could buy me a new start." She listened quietly. There was grief in his voice, old and raw, the kind that never really heals. "They thought I hid the map in the saddle," he continued. "But it's here, in my pack. That's why they'll keep coming." She looked at the satchel again, her brow furrowing. "And what will you do with it now?" He gave a weak smile. "If I live long enough, maybe sell it. Enough silver in those hills to buy a quiet life somewhere far from this." She nodded slowly. "A quiet life," she repeated. "That's all anyone wants, I suppose." The hours dragged on. She cleaned the wound again, gave him a sip of water, and checked the sky for signs of rain. There was none. The desert stretched endless and empty in every direction. By afternoon, the heat was unbearable. She built a small shade from her blanket and kept the fire low. The man drifted in and out of sleep, sometimes muttering words she couldn't understand. Once he called out a woman's name, but when she asked, he said nothing. As evening approached, she sat beside him, her hands resting on her belly. The baby moved again, stronger this time. She whispered softly to herself, telling the child to stay calm, to wait a little longer. He opened his eyes and watched her in silence for a while before speaking. "You've got someone waiting for you?" She shook her head. "No one. My husband's gone. Haven't heard from him since last winter?" "I'm sorry," he said. She gave a faint smile. "Don't be. He wasn't a bad man, just lost his way. The war took too much from him, took too much from everyone." He nodded slowly, understanding more than he said. The war had left scars on everyone, visible or not. When night fell, the stars came out bright and cold. She added a few sticks to the fire, careful not to draw too much attention. In the distance, coyotes called again. The sound made her skin crawl. "Think they'll come back tonight?" she asked. "Maybe," he said. "But they'll wait till we're too tired to fight." "Shh," she sighed, pulling the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Then we better not get tired." For a long time neither spoke. The fire burned low, the air filled with the smell of ash and dust. She could feel the weight of exhaustion pressing down, but something inside her refused to let go. Before dawn, he stirred again, restless. "If they come back," he said, "don't try to save me again. Take the horse and go north." She looked at him sharply. "I'm not running. You have to think about your child," he said. "This isn't your fight." She glanced down at her belly, then back at him. "Maybe not. But out here, we only have each other." He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. There was something in her voice that silenced him, something strong, unbreakable. As the first light of morning touched the desert, the wind shifted. She froze. Somewhere out there, faint but clear, came the sound of horses again. He tensed, gripping the rifle. "They're early," he whispered. She reached for the pistol, checking the bullets. "Then we'll finish what we started." The sun began to rise, painting the rocks red and gold. Dust clouds formed on the horizon once more. The riders were coming fast this time. The wounded man took a deep breath, pushing himself upright despite the pain. She moved beside him, ready, her heart racing. In that fragile moment between darkness and daylight, they both understood what was coming. The fight wasn't just for survival anymore. It was for something deeper. For the right to keep living, to keep believing that hope could still exist in a world gone hard and cruel. The sound of hooves grew louder, echoing through the canyon like a warning. The woman's fingers tightened around her pistol. The man raised his rifle, his body trembling but his eyes steady, and as the first rider appeared out of the dust, their fates locked together in that wild, unforgiving stretch of American desert. Neither of them knew whether the coming day would bring salvation or the end. But they knew one thing for certain. They would face it side by side. The morning air was sharp and dry as the riders drew closer. Dust rose around them like a storm cloud, turning the rising sun into a dull red glow. The woman crouched low beside the wounded man, her pulse racing. He steadied his rifle with shaking hands, pressing the butt against his shoulder, but his strength was failing fast. She could see it in his face, the pallor, the sweat, the tightness around his mouth as he fought to stay conscious. "They'll come from the left," he said hoarsely. "Use the rocks for cover." She nodded, her eyes scanning the ridge. The men were moving cautiously this time, spreading out in a half circle. They had learned from before. The leader, the man with the scar, rode at the center, his rifle ready. He called out again, his voice low but clear across the wind. "You can't keep this up, friend. Hand over the map, and we'll let the lady go. You've got my word." The wounded man let out a dry laugh that turned into a cough. "Your word's worth nothing," he shouted back. The scarred man smiled faintly, lifting his rifle. "Then I guess we'll take it the hard way." The woman's heart pounded. She looked at the man beside her. "We can't fight them all. We don't need to," he said. "Just long enough for them to think we can." He fired first, and the shot cracked across the ridge. One of the riders jerked back, his horse rearing in panic. The others scattered for cover, firing in reply. Bullets hit the rocks, spraying dust into the air. The woman fired once, aiming low, trying to drive them back. The noise was deafening, the chaos swallowing every thought. She moved closer to him, helping reload the rifle while he aimed. Smoke hung between them like a ghost. When a bullet struck a rock too close to her face, she froze, heart hammering. He reached out his hand, gripping hers. "Stay with me," he said. "Don't look away." Something in his voice steadied her. She focused on the sound of his breathing, the rhythm of firing and loading, the dry heat against her skin. Time blurred. She didn't know how long they fought before the gunfire finally slowed. When silence returned, the woman dared to lift her head. The riders had fallen back again, regrouping behind a low ridge. The scarred man was still on his horse, watching. His patience was running out. "They'll come at night next time," the wounded man said quietly. "When we can't see them." She turned to him, studying his face. His wound had bled through the bandages again. "You won't last till night," she said. He gave a faint smile. "You'd be surprised what a man can survive when he has to." But she could see the truth: he was fading. And the men out there weren't the only danger. The desert itself was turning against them. The water skin was nearly empty, the firewood gone. Even the horse had grown restless, stomping and snorting in the heat. By late afternoon, the air shimmered with heat waves. The woman searched the horizon for any sign of shelter. But there was nothing, just rocks, sand, and the endless hum of insects. When she came back to the camp, the man was awake, his eyes fixed on the pack beside him. "You looked inside, didn't you?" he asked. She froze. "No." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Good. Don't. The less you know about that map, the safer you'll be." Her voice was quiet. "You think they'll stop if they get it?" "No," he said. "They'll kill anyone who's seen it. That's how men like them work." She didn't answer. A strange unease settled in her chest. She wasn't sure if she feared the men out there or the secret lying in that worn leather bag. Something told her it wasn't just a map to silver. It was something darker, something men had already killed for. The hours crept by. The desert changed color as the sun dropped lower, painting the land in gold and red. She used the time to gather what little brush she could find for another fire. Every time she moved, she felt the baby shift inside her. It reminded her that she couldn't afford fear. Not now. The man watched her quietly. "You're brave," he said finally. She gave a faint laugh. "No, just tired of running," he nodded. "You remind me of my brother's wife. She had that same fire. Wouldn't quit, no matter how bad things got." "What happened to her?" His gaze drifted toward the horizon. She waited for him to come back from the mines. He never did. When I brought the news, she just stood there, staring at me. Then she said she'd always known it would end that way. There was a silence between them then, one that carried the weight of too many losses. The woman turned her eyes toward the setting sun. "Maybe none of us ever get what we hope for," she said softly. He looked at her, a shadow of sadness passing through his face. "Maybe not. But we can still try to make it mean something." Night came slowly. The air grew cooler, but the danger grew sharper. They built a small fire to keep the cold at bay, careful to shield the flames behind rocks. Every sound in the dark made them tense: the creak of a saddle, the rustle of brush, the distant cry of a coyote. The woman barely slept. She kept her pistol close, watching the stars move across the sky. Once, she thought she saw movement beyond the firelight, but when she looked again, it was gone. At dawn, the man woke her with a whisper. "They're close." She followed his gaze. On the ridge to the east, faint figures were moving, 3, maybe for men, creeping low along the rocks. He gripped his rifle. "They're splitting up. Trying to box us in?" She swallowed hard. "What do we do?" He hesitated, then said, "There's a canyon north of here. If we can reach it, they'll have to follow on foot. Harder for horses to move there." "You can't ride," she said. "I can hold on," he replied, his voice firm. "We don't have a choice." She helped him to his feet, wincing as he leaned on her. Every step was a struggle. They moved slowly toward the horse, keeping low. The pack with the map was strapped tight to the saddle. She mounted first, then helped pull him up behind her. He gritted his teeth but didn't make a sound. The moment they started moving, shouts rang out. The riders had seen them. Go. He gasped. She urged the horse forward, kicking hard. The animal bolted into the open, hooves pounding across the rocky ground. Bullets whistled past them, one striking the ground near the horse's legs. She leaned low, clutching the reins. The wind tearing through her hair. The canyon loomed ahead, a narrow cut between two cliffs. She could hear the riders behind them, closing in fast. The man twisted around, firing a shot that made one horse rear. But another bullet grazed his shoulder, and he slumped against her. "Hold on," she cried. "We're almost there." They reached the canyon just as the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds. The horse stumbled on loose gravel but kept going, plunging into the shadows between the cliffs. The walls rose high on either side, blocking most of the light. The echo of hooves bounced off the stone, magnifying every sound. She slowed the horse, listening. The riders had stopped at the entrance, shouting to one another. They couldn't follow easily without risking an ambush. The man slid from the saddle, landing hard on his knees. She jumped down to help him, lowering him against the wall. He was pale, his breathing shallow. "They'll wait," he said. "Try to starve us out, then we'll keep moving," she said. "There has to be a way through." He shook his head weakly. "It's a dead end after a few miles." "I've been through here before." Her stomach tightened. "Then why bring us here?" "Because it buys time," he said. "And maybe time's all we need." She looked at him, confused, but he didn't explain. Instead, he pulled the pack close, unbuckling it with shaking hands. Inside was a small leather case, old and worn. He held it out to her. "If something happens to me," he said quietly, "you take this north. There's a man at Fort Rainier named Wills. Tell him I kept my promise." She stared at the case. "What's inside?" He hesitated, his eyes dark in the half-light. "The truth. About the mines. About what they did to the people who worked them." Her breath caught. "So it's not just silver," he nodded slowly. "It's proof. And that's worth more than gold to the wrong kind of men." For a long moment, neither spoke. The canyon was silent, except for the wind whispering through the stones. Then, faintly from the distance, came the sound of a horse neighing. The riders were still there, waiting, patient as wolves. The woman closed the pack and tightened it against her shoulder. "Then we'll make sure they don't get it," she said. He looked at her, the hint of a smile touching his lips. "You might just be the bravest soul I ever met." She shook her head. "No, just someone who's got something left to fight for." Above them, the sky darkened again, clouds rolling in. The wind carried a promise of rain or something worse. And deep in the canyon, two hunted souls prepared for another day of survival. Knowing the real fight had only just begun, the wind had changed by morning. It came cold through the canyon, carrying the scent of rain and something heavier gun oil. Sweat the presence of men waiting just beyond the ridge. The woman woke first, her back aching from the rough ground. She checked on the wounded man beside her. His skin was pale, and his lips were dry, but he was still breathing. She could tell he hadn't slept much. The pain in his side had worsened, though he tried not to show it. She rose quietly, her hand resting on the small pistol tucked in her belt. The horse stood tethered nearby, restless and uneasy. The air was thick with silence, the kind that only comes before something terrible. She walked to the edge of the canyon wall, keeping low, and peered toward the entrance. Nothing moved, but she could feel eyes on them. When she turned back, the man was watching her. "They're still there, aren't they?" She nodded. "Waiting." He tried to push himself upright, grimacing as pain shot through him. "Then we can't wait too long. They'll close in soon as it gets dark again." "Can't even stand," she said. "I don't need to stand," he replied. "I just need to shoot straight." She frowned, shaking her head. "You won't last another fight." He gave a weak smile. "I might surprise you." Despite his words, she could see the truth in his eyes. He was fading fast. The blood loss, the fever, was only a matter of time. Still, there was something unbreakable in him, something she couldn't help but respect. She knelt beside him, checking the bandages again. "You said this map is proof. What kind of proof?" He hesitated, his eyes fixed on the canyon floor. "The men who ran the mines when the silver started drying up. They brought in prisoners, immigrants, even families. Worked them till they dropped, buried the ones who couldn't keep up. My brother tried to tell people. They killed him for it. That map marks where the graves are." Her breath caught. "So that's what they're trying to hide," he nodded. "And they'll kill anyone who knows." The words hung between them like smoke. She sat back, staring at the pack beside him. The truth inside that leather case was heavier than any gold or silver could ever be. Before she could speak again, the horse suddenly lifted its head and snorted. The sound echoed down the canyon. The man tensed, reaching for his rifle. "They're moving," he whispered. A moment later, a voice carried from beyond the bend, taunting, confident. "You can't run forever, friend. The canyon ends in 2 miles. Give us what we came for, and maybe the lady gets to walk away." The woman's stomach tightened. They were closer than she'd thought. She crouched beside the man, whispering, "What do we do?" He looked at the narrow path winding deeper into the canyon. "We make them think we're gone," he said. "There's an old mine shaft up ahead. If we can reach it, we'll have cover." She glanced toward the shadows stretching into the canyon's throat. It was a risk. If the mine was unstable, they could be buried alive. But staying meant certain death. "Help me up," he said. She slid her arm under his shoulder, helping him stand. He swayed, gritting his teeth, then steadied himself. They moved slowly, the sound of their steps muffled by the dust. Every few yards, he stopped to catch his breath. Behind them, voices echoed faintly closer now. The men were tracking them carefully, not rushing this time. They followed the canyon floor until the walls began to narrow. And there, half hidden by rocks, they found the mine entrance. The wood beams were rotted, the old cart tracks twisted and broken, but it was shelter. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint smell of rust. The woman helped him settle against the wall, then checked their supplies. Almost no water left. 2 bullets in her pistol, maybe 3 in his rifle. Not enough for another fight. He leaned his head back, closing his eyes. "They'll come before nightfall." She nodded silently. For a while, they said nothing. The sound of the wind through the tunnel was low and hollow, like a whisper from another world. The woman ran her hand over her belly, feeling the faint movement beneath her skin. Fear sat heavy in her chest, but she pushed it down. She couldn't afford to break. After a long silence, he spoke again, his voice weaker now. "When this is over, promise me you'll get that map to Fort Rainier." "Don't talk like that," she said firmly. "I need to know it won't all be for nothing," he insisted. She met his gaze. "You'll deliver it yourself." He smiled faintly, but there was no conviction behind it. He knew better. They waited through the afternoon as the light outside shifted from gold to gray. Then the noise began: hooves, boots, the creak of saddles. The men were entering the canyon. The woman checked her pistol again, her hands steady now. The fear had burned away, leaving only resolve. The man reached for his rifle, bracing it across his knees. The scarred leader's voice came again, closer than before. "You think we're fools? There's only one way through here. You can't hide." The woman glanced toward the mine entrance, where thin shafts of light cut through the dust. Shadows moved just beyond them. The sound of footsteps grew louder. "They're coming," she whispered. He nodded. "Let them." The first shot rang out, slamming into the canyon wall. She ducked low, firing back once, the recoil jolting her arm. The echo roared through the mine, deafening in the confined space. The attackers fanned out, some taking cover, others pushing closer. A bullet struck one of the wooden beams supporting the entrance. The wood groaned but held. Another shot hit the rock beside her, spraying fragments across her face. The man beside her coughed hard, his strength fading. Still, he lifted the rifle and fired again, dropping one of the riders who had ventured too close. The woman could hear the leader shouting orders, his voice cold and calm. "They're trying to flank us," the man said. She looked around frantically, spotting a narrow tunnel leading deeper into the mine. "We can go through there." He shook his head. "Too unstable? If it collapses, we're done. It's better than dying here," she said, before he could answer. A loud crack split the air, the sound of another beam giving way. Dust rained down, and one side of the mine entrance buckled slightly. The woman grabbed his arm. "We have to move now." They stumbled toward the tunnel, ducking low as splinters and rocks fell around them. Behind them, voices shouted and boots clattered over stone. She could hear the scarred man laughing. "There's nowhere left to run." He called. They reached the tunnel just as another bullet struck the entrance, sending a spray of debris behind them. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for two people. The air smelled of damp stone and decay. The woman led the way, using the faint light from her lantern. The man followed, limping badly. The walls seemed to close in around them, and the sound of their breathing filled the silence. "Where does this go?" she asked. "Back toward the ridge," he said. "If we're lucky, there's another exit. And if not..." He didn't answer. They moved deeper until the light from the entrance was gone. Only the flicker of the lantern remained. Then, suddenly, a sharp rumble rolled through the tunnel. The ground trembled beneath their feet. "What was that?" she whispered. "Could be a cavern," he said, "or them trying to smoke us out." She tightened her grip on the lantern, her throat dry. "We can't stay here," they pressed on. Faster now, though every step sent pain shooting through his side. The tunnel twisted and dipped, leading them into darkness so thick it felt alive. The air grew heavier, harder to breathe. Behind them, faint shouts echoed through the mine. The men were following. The woman stopped to catch her breath, listening. "They're coming closer." Leaned against the wall, barely able to stand. "Keep going," he said. "Don't stop." "I'm not leaving you," she said sharply. He looked at her, his voice low. "If they get that map, all this means nothing. You have to make it out." Before she could argue, another gunshot rang out, the sound bouncing down the tunnel. A bullet hit the lantern, shattering the glass. Darkness swallowed them whole. The woman gasped, fumbling for the pistol. The air filled with dust and echoes. She could hear boots pounding on the stone now, voices shouting orders. She reached out blindly, finding his hand in the dark. "This way," she whispered. They moved by touch, stumbling through the blackness, the tunnels sloping upward now. Somewhere ahead, she thought she saw a faint shimmer of light. Hope surged for a moment, but it was quickly cut short by the sound of more gunfire behind them. The man turned, firing once into the dark. The muzzle flash lit the walls for an instant, revealing the narrow opening ahead, a way out. "Go." He shouted. She hesitated, looking back at him, torn between fear and duty. But before she could decide, the ground shook again, louder this time. Rocks began to fall, dust choking the air. She screamed his name, reaching out as the tunnel roared around them. The last thing she saw was his silhouette, rifle raised, standing between her and the men closing in through the smoke. Then the tunnel collapsed, and the sound of gunfire was swallowed by stone. Outside, the canyon lay silent beneath the gray sky. The wind carried the smell of rain, and far-off thunder rolled over the desert. The truth hidden beneath the earth had not yet been lost, but neither had it been saved, not yet. The battle for it was only reaching its breaking point. The world was silent when she woke. Dust covered her face, and every breath burned like fire in her chest. The air was thick and heavy, and for a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then it came back: the tunnel, the gunfire, the collapse. She blinked hard, trying to see through the gloom. A faint shaft of light filtered through a crack above. It's just enough to make out the scattered stones and broken beams around her. Her first thought was of him. She pushed herself up, pain shooting through her leg, and called his name. The echo of her voice was swallowed by the earth. No answer came. She crawled forward, dragging herself over the debris, her palms raw and bleeding. Then she saw at the corner of his coat, half buried under the fallen rocks. Her heart twisted. She clawed at the stones, one after another, her strength failing with each pull, until finally she uncovered his face. He was still, his skin pale beneath the dust. but his hand clutched something tightly against his chest, the small leather pouch that held the map. Tears welled in her eyes. She pressed her fingers to his neck, praying for a pulse. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly a beat. Weak, but alive. "Hold on," she whispered. "Please, just hold on." She tore a strip from her skirt and pressed it against the wound at his side. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "You made it," he murmured. "So did you," she said softly. He tried to smile, but coughed instead, wincing. "The others?" "Buried under the rocks. The tunnel collapsed on them," she said. "We're safe for now." He nodded slightly, his breath shallow. "You have to get out. There should be another passage on the other side. Take the map." She shook her head. "Not without you." He looked at her, eyes filled with both pain and gratitude. "You can't save me this time. Save what we came for. The truth." Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to promise she'd drag him out if it took every breath she had. But deep down, she knew he was right. The weight of the mountain pressing down around them told her they didn't have long. She took his hand, squeezing it tight. "I'll finish what you've started." He exhaled slowly, relief softening his face. "Then my brother didn't die for nothing." For a long moment, they just sat there, hands clasped, the silence between them heavy but calm. Then his fingers went still. The faint light caught the edge of his face, peaceful now, the fight finally over. She bowed her head, tears tracing the dirt on her cheeks. "Rest easy," she whispered. "I'll see it through." It took everything she had to move the rocks and find the narrow crack he'd spoken of. It led upward, winding through layers of stone until she could feel fresh air brushing her face. The last stretch was the hardest climbing. Through the tight passage with her, swollen belly and trembling hands, but she didn't stop until she felt sunlight. On her skin again, the canyon stretched before her, washed in gold from the rising sun. The storm had passed, leaving the land quiet and still. She turned back once, looking at the collapsed mine entrance. A single gust of wind blew through, carrying away the last of the dust. She saddled the horse and rode until her body ached, stopping only when she reached the small river near the valley's edge. There she rested, washed the blood from her hands, and opened the pouch. The map inside was old, the ink faded, but the markings were clear. She saw the cross symbols scattered across the canyons, each one marking a place where bodies had been buried. There were dozens too many. That night, as she sat by the fire, she could almost hear his voice again. He had risked everything to expose the truth hidden in those hills, and now the burden rested on her shoulders. She thought of the people who'd been silenced, the families who'd never known what happened to their loved ones. She had the proof that could bring justice, but only if she made it to Fort Rainier. The journey was long and merciless. She rode through wind and rain, through ghost towns and endless plains, her strength waning, but her resolve never faltering. Each mile felt like a promise kept. When she finally saw the wooden gates of the fort rising in the distance, her heart nearly gave out. The guards stopped her at the entrance, wary of the dust-covered woman clutching a worn leather pouch. She told them everything: the mines, the men who'd died, the truth buried under the desert. At first, they didn't believe her. Then she unrolled the map and laid it before them. The names, the coordinates, the bloodstains on the paper, it was undeniable. Word spread fast after that. The newspapers called it the Canyon Graves. Soldiers were sent to dig up the sites, and what they found changed everything. The mining company that had ruled the region with greed and cruelty was dismantled. Families came from far and wide to claim the remains of those who'd vanished. The story of what happened in those hills became a part of Western history, one more tale of how the truth, no matter how long buried, always finds its way to light. Weeks passed before she returned to the canyon. The land was quiet again, as if holding its breath. The mine was sealed now, a wooden cross marking the place where he had fallen. She stood there for a long time, the wind tugging at her hair. "I kept my promise," she said softly. "They know now. All of them." She placed a small stone on the grave and turned away. As she mounted her horse, she felt the baby move inside her. It was strong, full of life. She smiled faintly, a single tear slipping down her cheek. The road stretched wide and open ahead. She rode toward the horizon, where the desert met the sky in a pale shimmer of light. Behind her, the canyon lay still, holding the memories of the past like secrets carved into stone. As she rode, she thought of all that had happened, the fear, the loss, the moments of courage that had carried her through. The man she'd met by chance had given his life for a truth bigger than either of them, and somehow that truth had given her a reason to keep living. By nightfall, she reached the ridge overlooking the valley. The stars began to appear, one by one, scattered across the sky like sparks from a dying fire. She built a small camp, fed the horse, and sat by the flames. For the first time in what felt like years, she allowed herself to rest. She pulled the map from her bag once more, not because she needed it, but because it reminded her of everything that had been fought for. Then she folded it carefully and placed it beside her. In the stillness, she spoke softly, as if to someone unseen. "You were right. The world needed to know." The wind rose again, warm this time, carrying the faint sound of the river below. She closed her eyes, letting the night wrap around her. The desert would remember them not just as survivors, but as the ones who dared to stand against the silence. The truth they unearthed would echo through the years, carried by every gust of wind that swept through the canyons. When morning came, the sky turned pink over the hills. She packed her things, took one last look at the horizon, and whispered a quiet prayer for the man who had taught her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to fight despite it. Then she rode west, toward the promise of a new beginning. Her child would grow up free. It's in a land built on the truth she had carried through the darkness. And though the world might never know her name, the story of what she did, the woman who saved a dying man and brought justice to the forgotten, would live on in every whisper of wind through the wild. Unbroken heart of the West, top of form, bottom of form,